Welcome to the Small Business Success Tips podcast with me, your host, Neil McDonnell. I've dedicated myself to your success in federal government contracting and host these podcast episodes as a way to provide key information and tips that will help small businesses like yours learn how to more effectively sell your services to federal buyers. Government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. In each episode, our guest shares their knowledge and experience with you, helping you learn a bit more about the process. While they'll have different titles, their common goal is to help the federal government benefit from what small businesses offer. Each guest donates their time because they realize not everyone has the budget or time to meet them in person, and we absolutely thank them for that. Our guest today is Dan Duckwitz, Deputy for Small Business in the Naval Sea System Command, or NAVSEA, Office of Small Business Programs. In this role, Dan is the lead for contracting, small business coordination, acquisition and industrial analytics, and the Mentor-Protegé program. Dan recently hosted government personnel from NAVSEA program offices and other federal agencies in NAVSEA's Headquarters Industry Day. You'll see him at many events like this around the country. Make sure you walk up and introduce yourself. You'll find no greater advocate for small business support of the Navy's mission than Dan Duckwitz. Welcome, Dan, and thank you for joining us today. As you know, I like starting each episode off with the same question to help listeners know a bit more about you. From a very high level, what do you do, and what do you like best about what you do?
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me on today. I educate contracting and program personnel about small business programs and advocate that they utilize small business capabilities to meet their requirements. I conduct a lot of outreach, like you were talking about, with current and potential small business partners. And the end goal of that is to get more firms to enter the NAVSEA marketplace to increase competition and give the Navy access to innovation. The thing I probably enjoy most is working with the data, actually, the procurement data. There's a large amount of procurement data that comes out of FPDS, and I like to try to experiment with that to see how I can use it more strategically in our small business office. The thing I like most about the job is probably that it does force me to get out of my shell a little bit and practice social skills and public speaking that I'm not naturally inclined to do. But I wouldn't say I enjoy that the most, but that's probably the thing I like about the job the most.
Oh, that's funny. Glad I scraped that off the introduction. Dan's a natural speaker and loves to do these outreach things. So let me help give you some practice by throwing some questions at you during this podcast. And really, for the listeners, especially if this is your first podcast episode, I try to pull out of the guest tips, obviously, on how to work with them, but also try to understand their organization, their agency a little bit better. And so, Dan, from a high level, can you just help me understand? I say NAVSEA and it rattles off my tongue now, but I don't even begin to be an expert at it. But where does NAVSEA fit from a very high, quick level? Among all of the major commands within the Navy, and maybe what does NAVSEA actually do?
So NAVSEA is one of the Navy system commands, and at headquarters, NAVSEA headquarters oversees 21 field activities. Each of those have a contracting office. A point that's a little bit different from some of the other system commands is NAVSEA headquarters itself has a contracting office. And the thing that we're engaged with is building, maintaining, repairing, and decommissioning all of the commissioned ships of the United States Navy, so surface and undersea ships, both manned and unmanned.
That's awesome. And it's funny, I got to remember not to be quiet on a podcast as I furiously write notes, because just one thing you said right there was new to me, but it totally makes sense. Maybe you can expand a little bit on this. You said, if I heard it correctly, right, that NAVSEA has 21 field activities. Are these like the Naval Surface Warfare Center type places? And is that what you mean by field activities, and each one of them have contracting offices?
Exactly. And so we have undersea warfare centers, we have surface warfare centers, we have the supervisors of shipbuilding, and we have regional maintenance centers, and we have the shipyards. So the larger activities there have their own contracting office, and they each one of those 21 field activities either has a full-time or a part-time small business ad representative at that contracting office.
Yeah, I think I interviewed Emily Harmon a while back before she retired, and she was mentioning like 160 small business professionals or something. Just an amazing amount of folks you have in there. So this kind of information, one last thing on the NAVSEA and kind of the support that it does is, can I go to your site and be able to see maybe an org chart as I'm trying to do my homework, right? And say NAVSEA's where I want to play, and I'm trying to see their organization more. Will I see it laid out in this way where it's NAVSEA at the top and then those major categories like surface warfare or underseas that you mentioned?
Yeah, so you'll see those different organizations laid out under NAVSEA, and you'll also see the program executive offices. There's one for the carriers, there's one for the subs, there's one for the surface fleet. So those program offices are all physically located at the Washington Navy Yard where I work, but they're also acting as a partnership with the fleet as well. But they live at the Navy Yard at NAVSEA.
Okay, perfect. And then just pulling a thread on, you were talking about how they support all ships, whether it's on top or underneath the water or whatever. But when you think about what NAVSEA buys, it's not just the ships, et cetera. I wanted to begin to dig in a little bit about just what type of services, products I think we can leave out a little bit as it relates to ships, but what kind of services does NAVSEA buy? And this might counter to another question that is, what do they use, but they don't actually procure it? Maybe somewhere else in the Navy they buy it and NAVSEA just uses it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the services that NAVSEA buys are primarily engineering, and then your other professional support services like business financial management, logistics services. The engineering services is a big portion of the services work at NAVSEA, both in planning the shipyards, designing the construction of the ships, designing maintenance schedules. So there's a lot of engineering services work that NAVSEA relies on industry partners to help accomplish those services. When NAVSEA, the program offices, while a lot of them are physically at the Washington Navy Yard, we buy the vast majority of our services through the Seaport vehicle, which is currently in its next gen iteration. It's the third generation of that multiple award contract, but those services are contracted out either through one of your previous guests, Matt, at the Surface Warfare Center in Crane, or at Dahlgren or Indian Head. NAVSEA headquarters, where I work, doesn't contract for any of that seaport work. It's pushed down to the field activities.
At the headquarters, if I'm following you say when it's on Seaport Next Gen, you guys don't do it. Do you use a different contract vehicle for what you buy?
So I would say for services, there is some engineering services work that you will see it on Fed Biz Ops, but that's typically a lot of that is notices for SBIR work, or you just see the topics come out for SBIR, which is a Small Business Innovation Research Fund, which is kind of like a 3-step process for the government to procure innovative approaches. But the majority of the work will be contracted through Seaport through one of the field activities and not through headquarters.
Okay. And how about just a little bit more on what NAVSEA buys and doesn't buy? But, one of the challenges for any small business out there, and we're selling, if I'm selling ship maintenance, for example, NAVSEA just is a natural thing. But when I begin to branch farther and farther away from that really clear procurement opportunity, say I'm doing landscaping services on an installation. I'm just making the assumption, by the way, that NAVSEA has installations, and I might ask you to talk about that in a second. But, any facility support in the buildings NAVSEA uses, painting a particular building, running cables through buildings, or IT services, cyber. And I know I just rattled off several of them, Dan, there. But, as you look at those type of services, are they traditional procurements within NAVSEA? Or are they done elsewhere and NAVSEA just uses it?
Yeah, a lot of those are typically done elsewhere, and then NAVSEA uses it. A really good resource on the Department of Navy Small Business Office website has the 10 major Navy buying commands. So if you're talking about construction or landscaping, that's something that Navy Facilities Engineering Command would be the one responsible for. So a lot of the time when I meet with small businesses, it's pointing them to the right major command. And then if they do fall under NAVSEA, is it something that NAVSEA headquarters is procuring, or is it something one of our field activities is procuring and acting as kind of a wayfinding post for a small business trying to figure out, I'm selling X, where's the person that buys this? Where are they located?
So, no, that's perfect. And that's one of the big things I think Emily was really trying to teach when I first started talking with her about getting people to understand the right buying command and what does NAVFAC or NAVAIR do compared to NAVSEA. Let me pull us a little bit towards the program offices, because part of what I'm trying to teach people in here is a little bit more about NAVSEA, and then what they do, and then the program offices and how they fit in. And I got to tell you, the program offices are a little bit of a mystery. And I used to think that I was just dense on trying to understand how the program offices fit. But then I realized that no, there's a lot in there. And I talked to even some Navy people who were, because they're in a different space, they're not fully aware, let's say, the various PEOs. When I look at NAVSEA, you mentioned 3 PEOs right off the top, but when I think about the program executive office and you got carriers and subs and surface fleet, I'm assuming those PEOs don't cross into other major buying commands. And one, is that true? And then the second thing is, are there PEOs that are not just used by NAVSEA but actually cross major buying commands?
So yeah, I would say the PEOs, they live under NAVSEA, but their mission it spiders outside of NAVSEA, because so PEO carriers, they're working and have full-time representatives from the fleet to inform, what's the next generation of carrier look like, what capabilities does it need to have, or what are the maintenance issues with the existing fleet. So they really are joint enterprises. And I get that it is a very complex and difficult question to figure this out. I mean, in my view, DoD is the most complex organization that's existed in human history. So it's no knock on you if you don't get where to go right off the bat. It is multi-layered, it's cross-functional, it is very complicated. And so one of my jobs is to help people that have a good service or product that could help the warfighter figure out how to navigate this maze.
Okay, so let's pull away a little bit then from the most complex thing in human history. And we'll come back to that. That's pretty good too, because I understood quantum physics and some of these other things pretty easy for me, but DoD was a harder one. Let's pull it to when people do come to you, right? Come to you and your colleagues around NAVSEA or even the Navy, Department of Navy. And by the way, if this again is your first time listening, I've been taught to say Department of Navy when we're talking about the Navy and the Marine Corps, and the Navy when we talk about Navy. But how can people come prepared? Like, I've talked a lot about the small business maturity model that we're standing up. And it's this idea of really giving people a roadmap, just like ISO might provide a roadmap for a corporation to be, or an organization to head towards maturity and their processes. When we think about where what you would like small businesses to have done already before they reach you. What's an ideal state of a small business that's coming and knocking on your door, and dismissing or getting the fact that you're willing to talk to any of us? I get that, and that's nice. But what's the ideal state for a small business to be at when we do come, so that we can get the most value from our conversations with you and your colleagues?
Yeah, so the ideal state would be where a small business comes into our office, they've read the small business strategy for the program office that they're targeting. So they're able to frame their solution under that strategy. And one of the best things that can happen with one of these meetings is getting feedback that I can take an action on. So have that business seen sources sought or RFIs that are unduly restrictive? They're asking for qualifications that aren't core to the requirement, or are they seeing things that are full and open that they think should be set aside? So I personally think I can make the most difference when I have tactical, actionable feedback from the small business, or they're saying, hey, this program office won't take any meetings with us. So it's something that I can walk out of that meeting with a task to accomplish.
Well, so I know you're going to understand this question when I ask it, but and that's perfect. Those are really good things, and I'm going to come back to a couple of them to pull the threads on them. But the last thing you said was an interesting one, is trying to get access to a program office maybe that won't be giving us access, et cetera, and you might be able to help us do it. But a lot of us feel really nervous about getting on a bad list, let's say, of a potential buyer, et cetera, which I find ironic, because then you're not on any list. At least if you're on a bad list, it means you're on their list. But what advice can you give us when we don't want to make waves, no pun intended?
Making sure that what you're selling or what you can do is meeting one of the pain points or the choke points, or can help the program managers, or they're concerned with cost, schedule, and performance. If you can speak to one of those, that's great. If you can speak to two of those, that's amazing. If you're actually have a product or service that makes sense for that program office and you've done your homework on there, you should be reaching out to them. Those program offices all have deputy program managers that have been assigned as a small business advocate. Their phone number is on our website. So part of their job is to meet with those companies. So don't feel bad about reaching out to them.
Yeah, no, it's, and I think one of the things I try to tell people, Dan, is that if somebody doesn't get back hold of you in 24, 48 hours, it's not because they're blowing you off, it's because they've stopped thinking about you.
Yeah.
If they reach back and say, I'm not going to talk to you, now you need to worry about maybe feeling bad, but otherwise they're just busy. And you need to give it 10 shots. I do like your tip there about cost, schedule, and performance, because often we go in and we want to talk about what we want to talk about. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just don't think it's an effective thing. But if we talk about what we want to talk about from their perspective of, my concerns are cost, schedule, and performance, that really helps. Is that tends to be how the program offices think? And I know I'm about to lump, tens of thousands of them all together in the answer, but that we're looking for people to help us reduce cost or improve the schedule, et cetera.
Yeah, and those are the three guiding posts of program management in the DoD. And I'll tell you, even when our organization, the small business professionals at NAVSEA headquarters, when we provide training or briefings to program people, that's the lens that we're approaching when we're giving our training to them. So it's definitely very helpful to know what's really important to the person you're talking to. And if you can frame that discussion in those terms, then to do it. So when we give market research training to program managers, cost, schedule, and performance are the things we're talking about. How is putting a little bit of effort here going to help in those metrics down the line.
No, it sounds like another webinar for me.
Yep.
Kind of a live showing of a cost schedule of performance. Let me push it back up to the beginning of your answer about the ideal state. One of the things you mentioned was read the small business strategy, and I think you said a program office. I know at the major buying commands that the idea was that each one of them have it, but do lower level offices have small business strategies?
So you won't typically see those at a much lower level. But so, for example, the program executive office for carriers has a small business strategy that is posted on our website and will be updated every 2 years. So submarines and I said carriers, surface fleet, those that kind of at that level, those are pretty large organizations. And so they have a small business strategy that's publicly available on our website. And I definitely encourage any small businesses looking to do business with the Navy to read those and see what are the pain points or what are the outreach efforts. What the program office say they were going to do that maybe they aren't. That's information I'd like to have as well. If you can feed that back to us at the small business office.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I hadn't realized that more than just the like NAVSEA level was having it. So I'll go try to find them and link them into the podcast notes as I can. Let's shift over a little bit to the tips, because you've started down this path of tips like read the small business strategy. When you think about, and that's, ideal state is coming prepared with those three things that we were just talking about. What about, actually, let me pull, I was going to ask you a different question on what frustrates you, so we'll come back to that in 1 second. But you did talk about, you like it when smalls come to you with an action where it's unduly restrictive. I see this a lot where people talk about, well, holy smokes, sometimes I see it just in an RFI that seems like it's completely an RFP. So I might ask you about that from a high level. But how can somebody come and try to push some of those restrictions? It's, what's the best way for us to approach you and or the procurement point of contacts on a particular restriction that we think should be lifted or changed?
Yeah, so those if it's a source of SOD or an RFI, they can almost evolve into, like you were talking about, mini RFPs, and that's, from my view, not really the intention of the government at that phase, is to say, hey, you're going to have to spend 40 hours putting together this huge document to respond to something that's supposed to be pretty preliminary market research. So when you do see that, there's typically an opportunity to provide comment back to that contracting officer through FedBizOps or Seaport.
Those kind of come to your head right away. What about things that you wish smalls would either start doing that they're not, or stop doing that we're doing? And let me make it hard on you. I'm taking away the don't lead with your tags, lead with your capabilities. So I took the easiest one away from you. But like when you think about one thing maybe that frustrates you, or just finds it's less effective that smalls are doing, and perhaps we should change that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I actually, I don't have that huge of a problem. If you're only going to talk about your socioeconomic, then that's a problem. But I don't have a problem with people leading with that. So just to be contradictory, but I'd say that the two things that I do not find helpful are when I feel like I'm being totally overpromised. Hey, we have this management approach that's going to save you 80% of your costs, and it just seems super unrealistic, and it doesn't sound credible to me. And then there's not a lot of meat behind that presentation. It's like, we just are really good at management. Those are not particularly helpful. And then I guess one of my pet peeves is too much name dropping. I think you were enlisted as well, Neil, in the Army.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So yeah, I didn't go to the academy. I was enlisted in the Army in a previous life. So it's cool when a company says, hey, we saw XYZ Admiral at this outreach event. I had a quick conversation with him, but every once in a while I'll get a small business that it seems like they're 100 million times better connected than I am within my own organization. And I feel like, how can I help you? You're going to get whatever business you have. You're already in the good old boys network, and you're not the one that needs my assistance navigating NAVSEA. Like, are you just wasting my time? But that's probably a personal, unique pet peeve that I have.
No, but I haven't heard that before. But as I hear you, I mean, it makes sense because it kind of goes back to what you were saying about the program office, and make sure you're addressing what they talk about, cost, schedule, and performance. Not that you don't care, but you care less about cost, schedule, and performance, and more about how can I help you move it forward, or if you're helping the program office, how can I help you find industry or something. But if they already have all the connections, for me, I'm always amazed that every time I have a conversation, how much I actually don't know. I know a lot, but it turns out there's a lot I don't know. Even in this call alone, just understanding the 21, now I'll be a NAVSEA 21 field activity expert, but give me a couple of days to put that together. What about a small business who's trying to do their homework and find out where something's done? I used examples like IT or cyber or landscaping, but what about something as simple as cabling, for example? If somebody, and I don't even know if this still happens, but like Cat 5 or Cat 6 cabling gets run through Navy buildings, or I'm assuming it runs through Navy ships. So that's how little I know about ships. But, if somebody was going to say, I specialize in cabling, I would encourage them or applaud them because they've got a true core competency. It's like, wow, there it is. It's easy for me to understand, and I can either help you or not now. How do they find out in NAVSEA or maybe the broader Navy where that's being procured? And let me just pause there.
So I would probably, if I was in that small business's shoes, I would start by looking at either USA Spending or FPDS to see if it's bought at a prime contract level. If it is, then that's something that you'll be able to see pretty quickly. I think USA Spending is a little bit more user-friendly for searching for stuff, but FPDS, while it doesn't have the gloss of a newer website like USA Spending, it has the receipts, so it has the data in there. So that's probably the first avenue I would look, just to see if because we need that. So is it being bought at the prime level? If it's not, then I would probably come talk to me and see, who are the large firms that are, maybe engaged in a larger effort that supplier service is being procured at the subcontract level.
Does it make sense? And that was an interesting way you said it, by the way, to see if it's at being procured at the prime level, because it instantly told me, it might be at sub level. On opportunities like that, and you can use this scenario across any category, but if cabling is at the subcontracting level, does it ever make sense for a small to try to push or pull it out of that and into the prime level, or is it more like the Navy's already made a decision that they don't want to go down, that like have a prime contract just for that, for example?
I think that's, a good conversation to have with us. That's one of our challenges as small business professionals within the government is, trying to figure out what's the right balance. Because if we broke everything out that we feasibly could, we would have a much higher small business performance level, but we'd also have 20,000 people in our contracting shop because we'd have so many contracts. So there is a balance between having our contracts be at a number where we can effectively award them fairly and administer them correctly, and just for the administrative ease of it. But that does necessitate rolling up some efforts. We're definitely strong advocates against what we call bundling in the government, where you take two contracts that are being performed by small businesses, two or more, and you put them together, and it's no longer suitable for small business. And that has a pretty extensive approval chain. And we do advocate that sections of work be broken out when it makes sense. But that's kind of like a business judgment that we'll have a conversation with the program office and the contracting shop about. But we are on the lookout for those opportunities. So I personally, and I think the rest of my office, does appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I might do a whole session just on exploring HVAC or cabling or something like that, and tracking it down to show people the steps I follow in the Navy or in NAVSEA to learn the information, because we're told to do our homework, but when we were in school, whether it was grammar school or high school, whatever, somebody taught us how to do research before we began to do research. And it's similar to the government. The Navy, it's just a process. What is that process? So, okay, so we're kind of wrapping up on our time here. I wanted to ask you one last thing. Like, if you think about all the small businesses you work with, the ones that come to your events, et cetera, what's something that some of your most favorite, not that you have to name your favorites or even claim that you have favorites, but if you had favorites, what are they doing? What's one thing that they're doing that you really think this is spot on for a small business that wants to work with the Navy?
So a lot of the stuff we talked about already, where they understand the program, they have a specific solution to a specific problem. The ones when we just had this industry day, our program offices presented, and they gave overview of their organization and what are the upcoming opportunities. And we had one small business say, what are the choke points in this process? And the admiral went off and listed 10 things, and everybody in the room was furiously writing. And that kind of mentality, I think, is really important to find out, where are the pain points, where are the choke points, and then how can you bring innovation or a different approach to help us solve that problem? That's really what we're relying on our industry partners for. It's nice to get a little bit more competition and kind of the more routinized services and get a little bit of cost savings, but we really need industry to help us solve some really, really hard problems that the Department of the Navy is facing. So when we have companies that did the homework and have a solution for that, that's great.
No, that's perfect. So we'll definitely be pushing constantly on the homework part. All right. Well, thanks, Dan. I know that I speak for our listeners when I say thank you for joining us today and sharing your knowledge. We're going to have your contact information and links where folks can learn more about what you talked about today down in the show notes. But for now, can you let our listeners know how they can reach you or the NAVSEA team, the NAVSEA headquarter team, if they want to learn more? How can they reach you?
Thanks for having me on, Neil. I can be reached. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, not as active as you are. But if you search for Daniel Duckwitz and try to post source of thought, RFIs, information about our industry days, helpful research stuff on LinkedIn, that's on my personal page. We have a website, Google NAVSEA, and then our our group email box for our small business team is NAVSEA_small_biz, B-I-Z, .fct, Foxtrot, Charlie, Tango, @navy.mil. That's our group box that the three of us monitor for kind of our industry-facing box. Yeah, and that's how you get in touch with me, and I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me, Neil. Perfect.
Yeah, thanks for being a guest. A lot of what I share on LinkedIn, I just borrow from Dan. So thanks, Dan. Okay, so as we wrap up this episode, I wanted to remind all of you listening of a few things. First, if you find this information valuable and think others would, please share a note about us on LinkedIn or one of the other social media platforms. Definitely give us a thumbs up where you can. Second, click the subscribe button to make sure you're notified when new podcast episodes are released. I'm your host, Neil McDonnell. I thank you for listening to this episode and hope you'll join us again for other episodes. Remember, government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process.